The scene is one of pure devastation, with fallen enemies scattered across the wooden floor. Up close, we see a few opponents who were completely taken down in the battle. Amidst it all, our protagonist rises, the only one left standing after this total wipeout. With a firm grip on his sword, he braces himself for whatever's next. Right after, his final opponent appears, a strong man named Bayan Gak. The big guy looks tired but still has a fierce look in his eyes, ready for a fight. Our protagonist gives him a cold stare and calls him by name, much to the man's surprise. Faced with this, Bayan Gak is shocked and asks how the young man knows who he is. The young man comments that he gets the memory lapse, since a lot of people have passed through the Golden Tiger Fortress. Even so, he admits he's a little hurt, and that he's waited a long time for this day. Because of this, Bayan Gak connects the dots and realizes the young man was once a prisoner there. In that moment, the big guy senses danger and starts looking for an escape route. However, our protagonist closes the distance in an instant, delivering a lightning-fast strike. The attack is so quick that Bayan Gak can barely react before getting hit. The young man then grabs his enemy and says it'd be a shame if he left, since their chat isn't over yet. Our protagonist says the arms and legs are next, telling him to think real hard about what happened 12 years ago. With that, Bayan Gak's memory starts to jog, and he asks if the young man was the escort warrior from the Unseong agency. The young man's eyes fill with memories of that dark time in his life. From there, a flashback shows tied-up prisoners being led away by bandits. In a dark cell, a younger version of the protagonist is in chains as a hot iron gets closer to him. A man with a cruel smile holds another heated tool, ready to begin the painful ordeal. A moment later, the red-hot iron is pressed against the boy's chest, and he screams in pain. His face twists in pure agony as he suffers at the hands of his captors. Back in the present, our hero's gaze is filled with a contained fury. Driven by this memory, he attacks Bayan Gak with incredible speed. The big guy barely has time to react to the young man's sudden and brutal blow. And so, the young man begins to unleash a sequence of merciless attacks on his opponent. He doesn't stop, making sure his enemy feels all of his pent-up rage. After a storm of blows, Bayan Gak finally falls to the ground, defeated. Our protagonist then asks one last question, wondering if he remembers the name Sama Jeon. Lying on the floor, Bayan Gak asks what the young man is talking about. Our protagonist then reveals that 12 years ago, he was captured and sold as a slave. From that, the fallen man remembers everything and starts stammering, completely terrified. In desperation, he tries to apologize, saying he was wrong back then. The young man, however, reminds him that he sold out the escort chief, a fact that shouldn't be forgotten. Right after, he grabs the enemy by the chest and prepares to reveal his name. With a scream of pure fury, he finally introduces himself as Samajeon. The revenge is completed with a single final, decisive blow. The enemy's life force spills across the white floor of the room. Samajeon now stares down at the lifeless form of his former captor on the ground. With that, he sheathes his sword, ending the confrontation once and for all. With a sideways glance, he seems to reflect on everything that just happened. Looking at the pile of defeated foes, he declares that now, he'll finally live a normal life. Because of this, he releases an energy that begins to destroy the entire place. And just like that, his silhouette is the last thing seen amidst the smoke and rubble. Through the dust, a young man appears, desperately yelling for his boss. Samajeon glances at him from the side as night falls over the destroyed location. The muscular guy approaches and informs him that all the prisoners have been freed. Our protagonist thanks him for the good work, and his companion asks how he feels after getting his revenge. The big guy jokes about him having been a slave, but Samajeon says the feeling isn't as great as he'd imagined. Looking at the bodies, he comments that the fortress leader isn't here, but the other guy says they can hunt him down later. And so, his partner asks if their next destination is his hometown. Looking up at the starry sky, the swordsman confirms that he can finally go home. He declares that the blood-stained path of the demonic sword ends here. This phase of his life closes with an image of the fortress under the night sky. Sometime later, the two companions are walking together through a lush green field. Samajeon asks if his friend is sure he wants to follow him, and he replies that he has nowhere else to go. The young man recalls that the big guy's earliest memories were of the demonic cult, and he says escaping from there feels like a dream. His companion still can't quite believe he's free after all this time. Meanwhile, an image shows a large, imposing demonic cult temple at night. In a flashback, we see our protagonist walking down a dark hallway at night. With that, Samajeon enters a room with a serious and determined look. In the room is Guan Hyo, the powerful leader of the Tongxian demonic cult. Our hero positions himself in front of the master, who is waiting for him at a large table. Immediately after, he gives a formal bow to the cult leader. A drink is served in a small cup to start the conversation. Guan Hayo then says that he was hoping the young man wouldn't show up. Without warning, the master throws a bowl with all his might in the young man's direction. The bowl flies swiftly toward our protagonist's face, but he dodges and catches just the small cup of liquor that was inside it. In a gesture of confidence, the young man drinks the entire liquid in one go. Guan Hayo starts talking about an old promise made in the Black Dragon Valley. The deal was that if they worked hard for 10 years, they would be set free. Sima Jian reinforces that the 10 years have passed, and he has fulfilled another condition. The leader then sips his drink while thinking about the word promise. Guan Hayo then places his cup firmly on the table before continuing. The master says that even though Sima Jian unified the demonic path, it still isn't perfect. Our protagonist corrects him, reminding him that the condition was to take down the 10 fortresses. He confirms that everyone has knelt before the leader, and Guan Hayo agrees that this is true. Still, the master remains suspicious as he drinks in silence. He starts to remember that among the children, the young man was exceptional, but not at that much. From there, he mentions that in martial arts, Sima Jian was weaker than a boy named Chiu Yu. However, everything changed after he returned from destroying the Ghost Gate family. A new aura surrounded him, and his body began to radiate a killer intent. Consequently, his fighting skills also became strong in an unimaginable way. Guan Hayo then questions him directly about what happened in that place. Without giving a clear answer, our protagonist simply apologizes for what occurred. The cult leader crushes the cup in his hand, calling the young man's words empty. Despite his anger, he dismisses him, saying that for the young man it was a terrible connection, but for him, it was a blessing. Finally, Guan Hayo promises to never forget his contributions as Sima Jian silently takes his leave. Before leaving, our protagonist thanks the cult leader for his freedom. With a simple take care, he turns and starts walking out of the room. Seeing this, one of the guards gets angry at his insolence, but Guan Hayo stops him from doing anything. The young man gives a subtle smirk as the guard remains outraged. From there, he simply leaves the room, leaving the cult master behind on his throne. As he walks through the door, he finally exits the Grand Temple, feeling free. His companion was waiting for him, and he thinks that after 10 years, his family will finally recognize him. Back in the present, his friend points to a giant tree and asks if that's the so-called guardian deity. With a look full of nostalgia, the young man confirms that it is indeed the deity of his home. He starts to tell a story about how his parents performed rituals there and how he used to play in the tree as a kid. Touching the trunk with a genuine smile, he celebrates the fact that he's really back. His travel partner jokes that he never imagined these happy moments, thinking he was always so serious. Suddenly, a child's voice yells, "Mister," and Sima Jian looks over in surprise. In front of them are 3 small children, standing and watching them from a distance. One of the boys then points and says that outsiders aren't allowed to touch the sacred tree. Sima Jian smiles and says he's no outsider, stating that the little ones are from Peach Blossom Village. Hearing this, the children are surprised and ask how he knows their home. Our protagonist explains that the tree is the village's guardian deity and that he lived there when he was little. Upon hearing this, the kids are shocked by the revelation from the young man who introduced himself. He then points to a spot and describes his old house near a lake north of the village. Sima Jian confirms everything with a calm smile on his face, showing that he isn't lying. Suddenly, the little girl gets angry and yells for him to stop lying, leaving our hero confused. The young man is speechless and wonders why they think he's being dishonest. The girl reveals that's Adu's house, and he doesn't have a father or a brother who looks like a thug. One boy suggests he could be an uncle, but the girl retorts that he's too ugly for that. Because of this, his companion gets furious and yells at the little brats as they run off, terrified. Our protagonist is left thoughtful about the name Adu, wondering why he's never heard of him before. The girl insists that Adu doesn't have any family that looks like them, and his friend gets ticked off by the insult. She then convinces the others that the man is lying and that they should get out of there. Furious with the insults, Sima Jian's partner bellows at the kids, who scamper away from him. Sima Jian is confused by the name Adu and wonders why he's never heard of anyone like that around here. Meanwhile, his friend uses the distraction to grab a peach straight from the tree. With great enthusiasm, he takes a giant bite out of the fruit, looking pretty hungry. Right away, the big guy is blown away by the taste and understands why the village has its name. He even offers one to our protagonist, but the young man refuses, staying focused on his goal. The clear blue sky shows it's a perfect day for his reunion with his past. They finally arrive at a peaceful spot with a cabin near a lake and mountains in the background. With a heart full of nostalgia, our hero walks slowly toward the house he's dreamed of for years. Looking at his old home, he notices that it's still exactly the same as before. His companion then asks if this is the place, and Sima Jian confirms that they've finally arrived. As they get closer, the swordsman's friend notices something and asks loudly who's there. Our protagonist's face turns serious, and he braces himself for anything that might happen. Suddenly, an older man with a not-so-friendly face appears in front of them. Right after, several other armed villagers surround the two, making the atmosphere very tense. In the middle of them all, the little girl from before stares at our hero, holding onto one of the men's clothes. The older man warns them that the house belongs to Adu and gruffly asks what they want there. Our protagonist shoots back that the house belongs to his family, and the villager asks who they are. Suddenly, Samajian seems to recognize the man and asks if he happens to be Uncle Jang. With an excited smile, he confirms he's the Uncle Jang who used to work at the village chief's house. The old man stammers, confirming his identity but still asks in confusion who the young man in front of him is. Without wasting a moment, the young man grabs the older man's hands in a gesture of reunion. He introduces himself as Sama Jian, who used to live in that house, but the uncle doesn't seem to remember the name. After thinking for a bit, Uncle Jang is startled and asks if he's the same little boy from back then. Our protagonist confirms with joy, but the older man can't believe it's true. To prove it, he shows a scar and explains it was made by a boy named Yuka after a fight. Faced with the proof, Uncle Jang finally remembers everything and confirms the story, completely stunned. Overcome with emotion, the old man hugs the young man with all his might, affectionately calling him, "You little punk." The man cries with relief and asks where he's been all this time and what happened to him. Our protagonist hugs him back with a serious and slightly melancholic expression on his face. Night falls on the village, and the emotional reunion continues in the young man's old house. Once inside, Uncle Jang serves some tea and asks if he's the same Jian who disappeared 12 years ago. Our protagonist confirms and recalls how the uncle warned him many times about the dangers of the job. The old man comments that the young man was always very determined, which is why he thought the worst had happened. With that, Uncle Jang takes a sip of his drink and asks how he's been all this time. Samajian falls silent for a moment, his gaze reflecting the hard times he's been through. From there, a flashback takes him to a chaotic battlefield with an explosion and many fallen warriors. Amidst the chaos, a masked warrior charges forward with his sword, ready for combat. A moment later, the scene shows a cry of pain from one of the combatants in the bloody fight, and then we see Samajian facing his final opponent on a desolate battlefield. His adversary is the Northern Heavenly Sword Demon, who talks about how the demonic path is in shambles. He continues his monologue, saying he scoffed at the Tongxian cult when he heard of their ambition to unify everything. However, he admits the rumors were true, as they defeated 10 fortresses with a single unit. Samajian stares him down with determination and states that now, he's the last one left. With a focused gaze, our protagonist says that if he defeats him, he'll finally be a free man. The enemy gives a smirk and challenges him to try, if he's able. The enemy taunts him, saying that if he defeats him, he'll become the greatest sword of the demonic path. And so, the two warriors clash in a shower of sparks that lights up the entire battlefield. The Northern Heavenly Sword Demon is caught off guard by the strength of our protagonist's blow. Because of this, he's thrown backward by the impact, crashing hard onto the ground. A large cloud of dust rises from the fall, and the man coughs, badly injured. With great difficulty, he leans on his sword to try and get up after the devastating attack. The opponent then admits he didn't expect the young man to be so strong. Our protagonist approaches the enemy on the ground, ready to end the fight. He's breathing heavily, showing that the battle took a lot out of him. Looking toward the horizon, he finally declares that all of this is over, once and for all. Back in the present, Samajian tells his uncle that he probably wouldn't believe it if he told him the truth. He sums it up by saying he was sold to mercenaries and wandered for a long time before he could come home. With a serious look, the young man takes a sip of his tea and asks where his family is. At the question, Uncle Jang reveals with a worried expression that his siblings went to Sohang. Our protagonist is confused and repeats the name of the place, trying to understand what happened. The uncle explains that it happened about 6 years ago, because they tried to hold on for as long as they could. After their conversation, the two companions say goodbye to the village and set off on their new journey. With a determined look, our protagonist turns and moves forward without looking back. Suddenly, a painful memory surfaces, the uncle revealing that his mother passed away the previous year. Struck by the news, the young man is completely devastated and goes to an isolated spot to deal with his pain. Tears stream down his face as he screams in anguish and guilt for the lost time. Collapsed on the ground, he wonders if he'll ever be forgiven for his absence and calls out for his mother. Sometime later, the two arrive in Sohong, the place where his siblings are living. They find the house a small, simple place in a more humble part of the city. Samajian stares at the dwelling with a sad look and comments on how rundown the place is. His friend notices his hesitation and jokes, asking if the boss is getting scared by any chance. The big guy reminds him how he used to walk through enemies like it was a stroll in the park, and the young man says this is different. His partner doesn't get the difference and encourages him to open the door, but Samujian says it's not that simple. He wonders what kind of face he can show up with after all this time, and how much they suffered to get here. His friend tries to cheer him up, saying they can make money and buy a new house, convincing him to go in. Full of determination, he promises he'll never be separated from them again and raises his hand to knock. However, his hand stops mid-air when a voice from inside asks who's there. Right after, the door opens, and a young woman appears in front of the two. Our protagonist's eyes go wide with surprise when he sees her face. He stares at her for a moment and realizes that it's his younger sister, all grown up. From there, a happy memory of when he used to carry her on his shoulders comes to his mind. Back in the present, he's in shock, finally understanding that it's his little sister. Meanwhile, his clueless friend blurts out a compliment, saying how pretty the girl is. Because of the comment, the young woman gets completely flustered and scared by the situation. Without a second thought, Sama Jian lands a punch right in the middle of his partner's face. With his friend silenced, he turns to the girl and asks if she happens to be Sama Jin. The young woman is shocked and questions how this man knows her name. With a gentle smile, our protagonist takes her hands and says that she's grown up so much. As he holds her hands, the reunion finally happens after so many years. Samajin looks at him with wide eyes, unable to believe what's happening. Upon touching her, Samajian feels a cold energy and wonders what could have happened to his sister. Suddenly, the girl gets scared and yanks her hand away forcefully, yelling at him to let her go immediately. Because of this, she loses her balance and ends up falling to the ground, leaving the young man completely stunned. Our protagonist tries to explain himself, all flustered, but an angry voice interrupts the moment. And so, another young man runs toward them, yelling and asking what they're doing there. Our protagonist and his friend face the newcomer with serious expressions. The young woman then cries out for her younger brother, and Samajian is surprised to hear that. The young man leaps into the air in anger, yelling that no one has the right to touch his sister. However, our hero blocks the attack with ease and deduces that the boy must be Ho. The young man introduces himself as Guang Ho of the Righteous Heart Association, making the mood even more tense. Filled with rage, he charges at our protagonist, ready to continue the fight. He throws a series of punches, but Sama Jian dodges them all without any trouble. The swordsman then reflects on how his siblings have grown and how things have changed around here. Guang Ho gets furious, pulls out a dagger, and accuses the man of playing with him, then threatens him. But our protagonist stops the attack easily, grabbing the boy's wrist firmly. Suddenly, another brother appears and tells Ho to stop fighting, especially on the anniversary of their mother's passing. Hearing about the anniversary and his brother's name, Sama Jian starts to realize they really are his family. The newcomer continues scolding him, saying Ho has gone crazy since he joined that gang. While Guang Ho defends himself, saying it's not a gang, our protagonist watches in relief. He feels happy to see that everyone is okay and has grown up, but his younger brother takes advantage of the distraction. Because of this, the boy tries a new surprise attack and lunges forward, dagger in hand. However, our hero's hand is faster and he catches the weapon with ease. The swordsman's friend steps in front and shatters the dagger with his bare hand, leaving Guang Ho shocked. The young man is spooked by the big guy's strength and calls him a ghost for his sudden appearance. Samajian's partner shows off with a grin and introduces himself as the Great Diamond Yaksha. Wang Ho doesn't understand a thing and accuses the man of being a thief who wants to rob their house. His friend is outraged by the accusation and yells that he doesn't look like a thug at all. Samajian tries to calm the situation down while his partner keeps yelling furiously at the boy. Our protagonist tries to explain who he is, but Guang Ho interrupts him when he says the word, blood. The boy stares at the man and talks about the Blood Axe gang with a look of pure panic. Upon hearing the gang's name, our protagonist gets a serious and attentive look on his face. Suddenly, a group of thugs appears and stares at the siblings from a distance. One of the goons comments that he's never seen these guys around here before and gets suspicious. The group's leader then approaches and gruffly asks who they are. Without waiting for an answer, one of the men grabs our hero by the collar. The goon repeats the question aggressively, wanting to know what he's doing there. Meanwhile, another thug stares at the swordsman's friend and is impressed by his size. Guang Ho then points and says this is association territory, questioning the gang's presence. With a furious look, our protagonist finally confirms that these are members of the Blood Axe. The thug laughs and says the area is theirs now, then calls Guang Ho out for a fight. With a mocking smile, he tightens his grip on our hero's collar to intimidate him. Because of the confusion, Guang Ho accuses his brother of coming here to finish them off. The thug tells him to cooperate and everything will be fine, but Samajian already has other plans. In one swift move, our protagonist lands a critical blow to the enemy's neck. The result is immediate, and the henchman's life force spills out all over the place. Seeing this, the other gang members are completely shocked and frozen. The new leader of the group then flies into a rage and yells at his men to take them all down. With that, Samajian turns to his friend Chiu Yu and asks him to finish the job. Right after, all the thugs run toward the big guy, ready to attack. Chiu Yu cracks a confident smile and gets ready to show them what he's made of. In the blink of an eye, he moves with incredible speed and takes down all the enemies. After ending the fight, he comments that those guys were nothing special. Looking at the fallen bodies, he then wonders if maybe he went a little too hard on them. Our protagonist's siblings are in shock, seeing that the man defeated everyone in an instant. The big guy then turns to them and asks if they still look like they're on the thug's side. Samajian says they aren't thieves and calls all of his siblings by their names. From there, he pushes his hair back and shows a scar, asking if they don't recognize him. Upon seeing the mark, his younger brother finally remembers and asks if it's really him. Our protagonist confirms with a smile on his face and says that he's finally back. Overcome with emotion, his brother hugs him tightly, and Samajian apologizes for taking so long. His brother asks what happened and where he's been, and Samajian says he'll tell him everything in due time. Back at the house, Chiu Yu jokes with Guang Ho and says he likes the kid's personality. Given the situation, the young man gets curious and asks why the big guy calls his brother boss. The brute explains that he challenged him when he was young and that the swordsman saved his life a few times. Our protagonist tells him not to talk about useless things and jokes that he just doesn't want to call him brother. With that, he changes the subject and asks how they've all been doing over the years. Hyan reveals that he's working as the chief of the escort warriors at an agency. Hearing the name of the job, our protagonist gets a surprised and thoughtful look. His sister then shares that she's also learning the trade and working with the general manager. Samajian thinks to himself that his mother must have been very against that choice. His brother confirms that she was against it more than he expected, and that the situation was pretty complicated. Guang Ho then blames his older brother, saying their mom objected because of what happened to him. Hyan retorts that the youngest has no room to talk, since he hangs out in back alleys, and the other says he makes more money. The older brother gets angry and asks if he makes money by exploiting the weak. Furious, Guang Ho yells that they don't do that kind of thing, and that he's told him that many times. Tired of the fighting, their sister slams her food on the table, startling both young men. Angrily, she yells that their brother is back after 12 years, and all they can do is argue. Suddenly, she notices her nose is bleeding and covers her mouth, completely shocked. Our protagonist rushes to help her as the young woman starts coughing nonstop. As he holds her, he feels the cold energy in her body and wonders how this could have happened. Guang Ho is stunned by the discovery and questions how the newcomer knows about her condition. The swordsman ignores the question and wants to know if they've taken her to a doctor for a diagnosis. Hyan explains that they've been to every doctor in the region, but no one could tell what it was. He reveals that one doctor said the same thing about the cold energy being the cause of it all. The young woman tries to stay strong and says that she's fine and can handle the situation. Right after, she retreats to her room, leaving the concerned young men at the table. Her brother reveals they moved to Sohun because of that one doctor. Guang Ho explains that they use medicine for her energy because otherwise, she would have already been gone. Our protagonist then asks with a serious look if there's a complete cure for it. Hyan says he doesn't know about a cure, but easing the symptoms is possible with a lot of money. Hyan reveals that the treatment is anything but cheap, and that he can't afford it on his own. He admits that without Ho's cash, they wouldn't stand a chance, and that's why he's in no position to judge him. With that, the older brother starts to cry at the table, and Samajian just stands there, watching the scene. Our protagonist then places a hand on his shoulder to try and comfort him during this tough time. He says he's the one who's in the wrong for only coming back now and apologizes for his absence. Samajian tells them not to worry about money and says they'll go to the doctor the next day. With a more relieved look on his face, Hyan thanks him and tells his brother to get some rest, since he must be tired. From there, the swordsman leaves the room while his younger brother watches him from a distance. Back at the table with Chiu-woo, our protagonist stares into space with a serious expression. His friend then pours a drink and comments that, if he'd known about this, they should have brought something. Our protagonist picks up his cup and asks if he's talking about the bandits' treasure. Yu confirms, saying they had a lot of stuff, but the boss told him to leave it for the prisoners. Samajian explains that the money also needs to go to the families of the warriors who didn't make it. His friend says he didn't want to touch their cash anyway, but that the decision was up to the boss. Suddenly, the big guy gets an idea and brings up an item that, if they sell it, will be more than enough. Yu then asks what the boss thinks of her condition, since he examined her earlier. The big guy insists on a guess, and our protagonist explains that her energy balance is broken. Because of this, Yu suggests that he inject her with yang energy, saying with the boss's strength, it would be easy. Our protagonist says no and reveals that he tried to inject a bit of his energy, but it had no effect. He continues, saying he couldn't even find a path for the energy, leaving Yu confused. With a serious look, the swordsman reveals that if they leave her like this, the young woman will be gone soon. The next day, they arrive at a clinic with a large wooden sign at the entrance. The whole family walks together toward the place to finally treat the girl's illness. When they get there, they find a crowd, and Yu comments that the line is huge and they arrived late. Our protagonist observes the number of people and concludes that the doctor here must be very skilled. Wang Ho confirms that the doctor is pretty famous in the region and asks them to wait a bit. Faced with the situation, the younger brother confidently walks to the front of the line to sort things out. He approaches a group of men and greets them as brothers, leaving the others confused. Yu asks who they are, and Hyan explains they're from the association and they shake down businesses for money. The swordsman understands that it's protection money, while his younger brother acts very humble. Yu remembers what Ho said and asks if he's a big shot in the gang, but Hyan says he's just a nobody. Seeing this, the big guy lets out a laugh and comments that's how everyone moves up in the world. At that moment, Guang Ho returns, all excited, and says the chat is over and they can go in now. Yu thinks the kid is very reliable and tells his boss they should head on in for the appointment. From there, the whole group enters the clinic's courtyard, which is packed with people everywhere. Our protagonist observes the commotion and notices that there are many doctors there, not just patients. Hyan then explains that he's traveled a lot on his missions, but there's no place bigger than this around here. He says that in the beginning, it was just one wing and a doctor from the Xiao family, but the place grew in just a few years. With that, Yu assures his boss that the doctor here is definitely not a quack. Our protagonist reflects that even such a skilled doctor couldn't cure his sister's illness. A moment later, Guang Ho greets a man who calls him young master and asks what he's doing here. The boy says the situation has changed, and the man tells them to wait while he goes get his master. And so, they enter a huge hallway full of patients waiting for medical attention. Yu then knocks on a door and announces that they're entering a more private area. A doctor then comes in and is surprised to see them, saying he was worried, thinking she had gotten worse. The doctor examines the girl and says that thankfully, her case doesn't seem to be one of the worst. Wang Ho then explains that his older brother wanted to see him, which is why they rushed over a bit. Our protagonist introduces himself as Sama Jian, and the doctor says he didn't know about an older brother. With a thoughtful look, the swordsman sizes up the man and thinks he has a modest face. However, he feels something strange and wonders if the doctor happens to know martial arts. Yu whispers to his boss and says the man seems decent, and our hero agrees. The young man explains that he's been away for a long time, but rushed here as soon as he heard about her illness. With a slightly odd smile, Dr. Wang Zhong simply welcomes him. From there, he begins to examine the young woman, gently holding her wrist. Everyone in the room watches attentively as the professional makes his analysis of the situation. Wang Zhong says the girl's illness weighs on his heart and makes him reflect on his own skills. The brothers defend him, saying it's thanks to him that the young woman is still alive with them. The doctor is grateful but reveals he's only postponed the worst outcome, leaving our hero in shock. He reflects on the man's words and thinks about what could happen to his sister's life. Wang Jiang then mentions that using better medicinal ingredients would be much more effective. Wang Jiang explains that the current ingredients are already working a little, and with better ones, it would be much better. With that, our protagonist asks what kind of ingredients they should use for the treatment. The doctor reveals that so far, he's used items with yang energy to neutralize the coldness in her body. He says the main one is the fire spirit grass, but that similar or better things should work. The best option would be the 1,000-year grass, but it's almost impossible to get, and there's also stone milk. Samajian asks if the clinic has any, and the doctor says no, explaining it's a rare and dangerous remedy to have. Faced with this, our hero realizes it's a precious medicine that martial artists seek out. With a determined look, the swordsman then asks where they can get this item. Huang Jiang looks at him and asks if he's ever heard of the Water Dragon Merchant Association. The doctor confirms it's the association from Hangzhou, one of the biggest in the Central Plains. He says he was called there because the association chief's son caught malaria and needed help. Huang Jiang was shocked when the man showed him the medicinal ingredients he had on hand to help. Our protagonist asks if he used the rare item, but the doctor replies, "Of course not." He explains that if he used that for malaria, every doctor in the world would laugh in his face. From there, he reveals that when he said he didn't need it, the association chief made a joke. Without beating around the bush, our protagonist gets straight to the point and asks how much the ingredient costs. With a smile on his face, Wang Jiang reveals that the chief would sell it for 300 taels of gold. Upon hearing the absurd amount, the young man's siblings are completely shocked by the price. Young Jin closes her eyes, her face blushing with embarrassment over the complicated situation. Hyein comments that 1 tael of gold is already worth half a year of their sister's medicine. Cheol Yu then suggests a payment plan, but the doctor makes it clear that's out of the question. The big guy thinks for a moment and says that if they sell that thing, they'll be able to get the money. Hearing this, the swordsman's siblings are confused and ask what he's talking about. Our protagonist gets annoyed and tells his friend to stop talking about the demon Buddha temple. Cheol Yu starts to explain that they got an item on a job at Mandiok Mountain. He reveals he found a shiny stone that was worth 400 taels, leaving everyone speechless. The siblings shout the amount one more time, unable to believe what they just heard. With her eyes full of hope and tears, young Jin calls out to her older brother. Our protagonist comforts her and promises that no matter what, he will get that item. With a determined look, he turns to the doctor and asks him to set up a meeting for the purchase. With an excited smile, Wang Jiang says he'll get in touch with them immediately. Sometime later, the two companions arrive at a large and imposing association building. Once inside, they position themselves in front of the association's chief to begin the negotiation. However, the woman sitting in the chair firmly states that they will not sell the rare item. Faced with the refusal, our protagonist questions what she just said, not believing the response. The chief then repeats firmly that the association will not sell the stone milk to them. Immediately after, she gives a mocking smile with her gold tooth and asks if they understand. With a serious look, our protagonist remains calm and asks for the reason for the refusal. The woman points to the shiny stone on the table and says that it's not enough to cover the price. Hearing that, our hero's face fills with a contained fury at the woman's audacity. The swordsman asks if she thinks it's a fake, but the chief says she has a good eye for these things. She confirms the stone is a high-quality luminous pearl, and the young man insists on knowing why. The woman is silent for a moment with a not-so-friendly expression on her face. From there, she reveals that she was joking about the price, but that she never actually intended to sell. Finally, the association chief arrogantly asks if he didn't hear the circumstances of the story. Our protagonist listens as the woman says her son had chronic malaria, and it was her only choice. Cheol Yu thinks that the blue stone milk is known to revive the dead and is very difficult to obtain. The chief explains that if the news got out, the place would become a target for many powerful people. She kept the item as an emergency supply and made the doctor promise secrecy after her joke. Sama Jian reflects that the doctor isn't the type to break a promise so easily. The woman deduces he must have mentioned the item while looking for a solution for a patient. With a keen eye, she stares at our protagonist as if she knows his whole situation. She says that now that the secret is out, many will covet the item, and she should get rid of it. However, the woman states she can't just hand over such a precious elixir and that she's going to raise the price. With a greedy smile, she finally reveals that the new price will be 500 taels. Faced with the new absurd price, the two companions are completely shocked and speechless. The chief then picks up the luminous pearl and admits that their item is of very high quality. Even so, she says the stone is small and it would be hard to get 400 taels of gold for it. At best, the woman appraises the item at around 300 taels, and our hero is surprised. She adds another 200 taels to the final price and says she will hand over the blue stone milk. Furious with the offer, Cheol Yu chews the woman out and asks if she's completely lost her mind with that price. He yells that there's a limit to this nonsense and threatens to tear down the entire association right then and there. Samajian cuts him off and tells him to calm down and not try to solve everything with brute force. The woman then asks how much money they have, and Cheol Yu starts counting what they brought with them. Our protagonist offers 100 taels and says they'll only keep the essentials to live on, shocking his friend. He then faces the association chief and asks what kind of people she thinks they are. The woman replies that although they're young, she can see the look of war veterans in their eyes. Samajian reveals they didn't choose it, but they ended up walking the demonic path, and the woman is startled. He confesses they've taken countless lives and that he made a promise to himself when he finally escaped. The promise was to end that life full of bloodshed and finally live in peace with his family. However, he explains that his family is in danger, and because of that, he can't keep his promise. Faced with the veiled threat, the association chief stares at him with a serious and suspicious look. She thinks that if he mentions a dark past and is counting pennies, the story probably isn't a lie. And so she agrees but warns that the association is being generous and that he will need to help her. Without hesitation, our protagonist simply accepts the terms and agrees to the woman's proposal. Later that night, the two companions are camped in a forest, resting around a campfire. Chio-yu complains angrily, saying if it weren't for the boss, he would have taken down those guys from the association. Our protagonist then apologizes and says the money they spent belonged to both of them, not just him. The big guy retorts that it doesn't matter, since they're trying to save his younger sister's life. He explains he's just ticked off because the merchants knew about the situation and still tried to take advantage of them. Chio-yu suggests going back and taking the medicine by force, but Samajian questions if he wants to stain the item with blood. Hearing that, the big guy stops for a moment and reflects that it's really not a good idea. He remembers that although they were forced, they still did a lot of wrong things to survive. Samajian agrees and says that to unify the demonic path, they spilled a lot of people's blood. From there, he states that now that they've escaped, they need to leave their old habits behind to fit in. The young man explains that in the Central Plains, there's an order, and they need to adapt to it. He reveals that handing over the 100 taels was a strategy to show they weren't a threat. His plan is to save his sister, get a job, and build a normal life as a form of redemption. With that, our protagonist says he's not forcing his friend into anything, and that he can leave if he wants. Chio-yu apologizes for getting worked up and remembers they sacrificed a lot to escape. Chio-yu says they can't dishonor the memory of the companions who were lost so they could get away. Samajian comments that situations like this bring back old memories, and Chio asks which ones. The big guy remembers the blue stone milk he received and regrets not saving a little. Our protagonist says it wouldn't have helped, since the amount was barely enough for his friend's giant size. With a smile, the big guy brags about completing his indestructible diamond body with that help. He then comments that he can also smell the stench of blood on bad people, like those guys. Suddenly, the big guy hears a strange noise and wonders what they're doing out here. Our protagonist says he has a bad feeling and that they need to check out the situation up close. A moment later, a group of armed horsemen gallops through the forest in a great hurry. Without warning, the two companions are surrounded by a band of men on horseback, ready for a fight. The horsemen stop abruptly and prepare for a showdown, with the two young men in the middle. From there, the three men at the front of the group stare at the pair with less than friendly looks. Our protagonist then comments that the situation is not looking good for them. The leader of the bandits mocks the young men and says he thought he'd lost sight of them. With a cruel smile, the man suggests they should start the job by cutting off both their legs. Our protagonist gets a serious look and wonders if these men have been following them. Faced with the situation, the masked leader tells them to hand over the item for a peaceful end. He continues the threat, saying otherwise, he'll make them experience the torment of the underworld. The pair is confused and our hero questions which item the man is referring to. The horseman then reveals he's talking about what they got from the merchant association. With this, Samajian realizes he was betrayed by the chief who promised to keep the transaction a secret. Our protagonist tells them to leave because he's seen enough bloodshed, but the leader tells him not to play dumb. One of the henchmen reveals they confirmed he had the blue stone milk and followed them here. Another bandit comments they almost raided the association, afraid the chief would use the item. One of the men draws his sword and insults Chio-yu, calling him a bear with a disgusting face. The big guy finds the comment funny and asks what that makes those guys, if he's a bear. The goons decide it's no problem revealing who they are, since the two are going to be gone anyway. Chio-yu scoffs and says it's a courtesy to satisfy the curiosity of those who are about to depart. And so, the men introduce themselves as the Celestial Massacre Gang, who rule the Knights of Hangzhou. The leader tells them to shut up and pay attention as his men completely surround them. The gang leader gives an ultimatum, saying he'll count to 3 for them to decide between the options. Chio-yu then scoffs and asks why, instead, they don't just be the ones to depart this time. Faced with the taunt, the man is completely shocked and speechless at the big guy's audacity. Filled with rage, he wonders how the young man dares to mock him and calls his men to fight. His eyes glow, and he yells that since they want a taste of the underworld, his men will give them what they asked for. From there, all the bandits rush toward the duo, ready to begin the attack. Chio-yu then comments that there's nothing worth protecting if you have to give up your life for it. Our protagonist says there's nothing to be done, as he had already warned him what would happen. The big guy gets ready for the fight and comments on the smell of blood and their killer intent. Furious, the leader orders his men to tear out the eyes and tongue of the insolent brute in front of him. With that, 3 of the henchmen draw their swords and charge at the big guy with everything they've got. The brute faces the enemies and, with a mocking smile, challenges them to bring it on. However, before the fight really begins, Chio-yu tells everyone to wait for a moment. Our protagonist then questions him from the side, wanting to know the reason for the sudden pause. With a surprised look, the big guy seems to have noticed something very important at that moment. The brute falls silent as he spots three mysterious figures approaching through the dark forest. Chio-yu gets his boss's attention and points to the people who just arrived on the scene. Suddenly, the bandits turn and surround the new group that appeared. The woman in the group observes the scene and thinks they are unlucky merchants getting robbed. Seeing the situation, she turns to the duo and asks if they happen to need any help. Our protagonist is confused and wonders why strangers would be offering to help. And so, he explains that the men are thugs from the Hangzhou underworld and are very dangerous. Chio-yu comments that the ladies' guards look skilled, but that they can still handle it. One of the guards says the real expert is the woman and asks for our protagonist's help. With a serious look, the swordsman seems to consider the man's request for help. The bandits start to move in, and the newcomers prepare for what's to come. One of the guards asks what to do, and the woman gets annoyed by the enemy's killer intent. She then gives a warning, saying that if they back down now, no one will get hurt in the confrontation. The bandit leader realizes she has status, but what matters is getting the blue stone milk. Enraged, the man calls them fools and yells for his men to finish them all right there. From there, several bandits leap into the air and charge forward to attack one of the woman's guards. The man calls them worms and draws his sword, while our protagonist also gets ready. With a look of disgust, the goons attack, but the guard's blade flashes with a swift movement. In a single sword strike, the man hits all the enemies at once in a powerful attack. His weapon's sheath flies through the air as the bandits are thrown far away by the impact. A moment later, all the men fall to the ground, completely defeated by the mysterious swordsman. One of the survivors warns his boss that they are experts and the situation has gotten very complicated. With a smirk, the guard sheathes his weapon after finishing the dirty work. Seeing this, Chio-yu is impressed by his skill and says the guy's not bad at all. The bandit leader becomes enraged by the humiliating defeat and screams in pure rage. Because of this, he leaps from his horse and charges at the guards to fight with his own hands. The man attacks the other guard, and the two swords clash in a bright flash in the middle of the forest. However, the guard dodges with ease and spins behind the enemy in an agile move. The young man says he could have lived if he had run when the lady showed mercy. The gang leader gets even more furious and prepares to continue the fight against the guard. The guard praises the opponent's strength while blocking the attack with his sword. And so, the gang leader yells from the impact of the blow and loses his balance. With an agile movement, the guard passes him and delivers a quick and precise attack. The leader is struck in the back, and blood splatters everywhere from the force of the cut. Because of this, the man falls to the ground lifeless, ending the fight once and for all. The other guard then turns and asks why he took so long to finish it. The young man comments that the leader was just the leader, and that he wasn't that strong. He reveals that the others surrendered as soon as a few of them went down during the fight. The guards wanted to finish them all, but the lady told them to spare those who surrendered. With the fight over, our protagonist approaches and thanks them for the help they provided. The woman says it was nothing and that they did what was right in that situation. The young man explains that he needs to leave because he has an urgent matter to attend to. And so, the lady tells him to go ahead, as they'll take care of the rest of the bandits. Before leaving, our protagonist introduces himself as Samajian and promises to repay the debt. Chio-yu then makes fun of his boss, and Samajian immediately tells his friend to shut it. One of the guards complains that they were rude and should have cleaned up the mess before leaving. The woman, however, defends the pair, saying they asked for leave, and she agreed to their departure. Suddenly, her eyes go wide as if she's realized something very important about the situation. At her reaction, her guards get startled and ask with concern what happened to her. The lady then reveals that those two men weren't the least bit scared of what happened. She repeats the sentence, and her companions are confused, not understanding what she means. The woman explains that even with the bodies on the ground, they showed no sign of being disturbed. And so, she comments that their attitude was like that of someone watching a show. Sometime later, our protagonist finally arrives back at Dr. Wang Zheng's clinic. He enters a room full of medicines and medicinal herbs with the rare item in his hands. A moment later, the young man turns upon hearing someone rushing into the room where he is. Wang Zheng runs toward him and anxiously asks if he managed to get the blue stone milk. Our protagonist confirms he got the item and carefully begins to unwrap the package. The doctor feels embarrassed for not going with him, and Samajian says his help was enough. Wang Zheng thanks him for his understanding and asks about the younger brother who accompanied him on the trip. Our protagonist explains that he sent the youngest to get the little sister and that he should arrive soon. Wang Zheng looks a little awkward at the answer and seems somewhat uncomfortable with the situation. Our hero notices the mood and thinks they must have interrupted some urgent matter of the doctor's. With that, he apologizes and says they'll treat his sister and visit him later, but Wang Zheng denies any inconvenience. The doctor reveals the real reason for not going was the arrival of guests from his main family. Our protagonist is surprised and repeats the man's words, trying to understand what he's talking about. Wang Jiang seems a bit tense, touching on the subject, and covers his mouth with his hand. From there, he asks if the young man has ever heard of the renowned House of Living Immortal Healers. The swordsman is shocked, as it's the medical family that revives even the dead, and he didn't know about the doctor's connection. Huang Jiang says he consulted his family about the illness, and that they showed great interest. The young man praises the doctor for having treated his sister, but the man says he was only maintaining her condition. He explains that due to epidemics, they couldn't send a doctor to help with the treatment. However, Huang Jiang reveals with a smile that a doctor from his main family has finally shown up. The doctor explains that he's just passing through and will come back to examine the young woman after his business. Wang Jiang says the doctor's skills are the best and incomparable to his, as he is just a disciple. Full of gratitude, our protagonist thanks him and bows to the doctor, who says he's just doing his job. Wang Jiang explains that the doctor will return as soon as possible, but he can't say the exact date. The swordsman smiles and says that if his sister is cured, he can wait as long as it takes. Suddenly, the doctor's face turns serious, and he seems very worried about something. Samajian notices the change in expression and asks if there's a problem by any chance. The man thinks he can't give them false hope, but he also doesn't want to ruin their happiness. Because of this, he plays it off, saying it's nothing and that he'll contact them later. Sometime later, we see the family gathered at their country house on a very peaceful and sunny day. During the meal, the sister and brother serve the food, and everyone seems much happier. Our protagonist then asks Hyan where he's going on his next escort mission. The young man replies that his next destination as a warrior will be in the city of Wuxi. Samajian comments that the place is quite far north of where they are living now. Hyan confirms the distance but says that if nothing happens, he'll be back in 2 weeks. The swordsman is silent for a moment, just observing his younger brother. From there, he finally questions him if he intends to continue with this dangerous job. Hyan asks if he shouldn't continue, and his brother says the work is too dangerous for him. Samajian reminds him that he came back after 12 years and fears the same could happen to the young man. The young man says he started at 17 and that if he's afraid of the future, he won't do anything with his life. Our protagonist then reveals he's saved up money so he won't have to work in that field anymore. Hyan asks if he didn't spend it all, and the swordsman gets flustered by the sudden question. Suddenly, Chiou is startled by the question, and the young man turns to him suspiciously. Samajian blushes and says the big guy is always meddling in everything, but it was just an excuse. The young man says that, if there's still money left over, there's nothing he can do about it anyway. Our hero suggests buying land, but Hyan reminds him they don't even know how to farm. He thinks about going into business, but his brother says it's harder and they'd lose everything without experience. Wang Ho and Chiou offer to help with the association's influence, and Hyan gets annoyed. The big guy guarantees he has a lot of influence, but the young man reminds him that's not how it looked. Hyan says they need to see about their sister's treatment and asks what the rush is for all of this. He then invites his brother to work with him and says Chiou would be welcome at the agency. However, our protagonist doesn't like the idea and turns down the offer to go back to that line of work. His sister is quiet for a moment and suggests he shouldn't decide things in a hurry. Our protagonist agrees that he was being hasty and says he'll think calmly about the future. With a smile, Hyan agrees to seriously think about what his older brother said. And with that, the family talk comes to an end and they all decide it's time to eat. Sometime later, our protagonist and his friend are walking through a bustling city. Chiou complains a lot because finding an honest job is a really tough task. And so, the big guy suggests they take a break, and the swordsman agrees with the idea. They decide to grab some dumplings and walk toward a street food stall. Chiou orders 2 plates of meat dumplings and asks if the vendor also has any drinks. The man apologizes and says he doesn't sell alcohol, so the big guy just asks for the food. Now sitting at the table, his friend asks what they're going to do, since there doesn't seem to be any work for them. Our hero reflects that after a life of fighting, it's not easy to find a normal job. Because of this, he suggests they try starting a business and ask Ho about it. Chiou likes the idea, but Samajian says he actually wants to get Ho out of that gang life. The big guy jokes that his boss doesn't have the personality for business and would probably end up roughing up the customers. Chiou lets out a laugh and agrees with the joke as the vendor approaches with their food. The old man serves the dumplings, and the big guy says they'd better eat before thinking about the future. The dumplings look super juicy, and one of them is picked up with chopsticks for the first bite. After tasting the food, Chiou is impressed and comments that it tastes really good. Our protagonist tries one and agrees that it's way better than yesterday's, praising the filling. Curious, he asks the vendor if it's pork, and the man confirms it right away. The swordsman then reflects on the huge difference in taste, even though it's the same old meat. With great pride, the vendor brags, saying that no one uses meat as high quality as he does. Chiyo-yu asks if he by any chance uses a different cut for his dumpling filling. The man explains that it's not the cut, but rather who butchered the pig, and Salmajian understands it's a special method. And so, the vendor reveals that the method is the same, but the butcher's skill makes all the difference. Chiyo-yu doesn't get it all, but our protagonist suddenly senses a great danger approaching. His gaze turns serious, and he goes on high alert from the completely unexpected situation. In a vision, a man takes down an animal with a single, powerful, and precise blow right to the head. A moment later, the pig drops to the ground, already lifeless, showcasing the butcher's incredible skill. Back in reality, Chiyo-yu asks if his boss is okay, and he gets a quick thanks for his help. With a smile, the big guy comments that a pig appeared out of nowhere, and the situation was pretty weird. In the distance, a group of men runs desperately toward the two companions and the animal. Arriving there, they ask breathlessly if the pair is okay after the commotion. The big guy says they're fine, but that their pig won't be as lucky as they were. Chiyo-yu jokes that they're not going to ask them to pay, since it was the men's carelessness, and they are shocked. The young men fall to their knees on the ground, afraid of the reaction from the intimidating-looking pair. Suddenly, an old man appears and yells at the men, calling them incompetent idiots. He continues his scolding and asks how many times this has happened, and the men apologize. The old man says the apology should be for the pair, not for him, since he didn't do anything. And so, the men apologize, and our protagonist says it's all good since no one got hurt. The old man also apologizes and explains that the candidates let the pig escape, and he thanks them for their help. Hearing the word candidates, our protagonist gets a curious and slightly surprised look. The old man says he owns a butcher shop and is looking for someone to take over the business after him. With that, the swordsman connects the dots and asks if he was the one who butchered the pork for the dumplings. The old man confirms with a serious look that he was indeed the one who butchered the pork for the dumplings. From there, our protagonist asks if they can take a look at the butcher shop, and the old man is confused. The man questions the reason, saying there's nothing to see because it's not a pleasant sight. Our protagonist replies that it's not a common sight to find around here either. Faced with that response, the old man stares at the two for a moment, seeming to consider the proposal. A moment later, he agrees to the request and tells them to do as they please. And so, they head to the back of the place where the so-called butcher shop is located. Once there, the old man stares at the pig on the ground while his apprentices watch everything. He then says the animal is no longer usable because the customers had to do the work of catching it. The master turns to the young men and asks why they think the dispatch went wrong. One of them answers that the chisel's position wasn't right, and the other says the hammer blow missed the target. The old man agrees with their answers but reveals that everything was wrong from the very beginning of the task. He explains that the most important thing is to ensure the target doesn't realize it's being taken down. The apprentices complain and ask how they could possibly know that since they can't communicate with it. The master gives them a sharp, serious look, as if he's disappointed with their response. Another pig is then brought in and begins to eat peacefully from a wooden bowl. With a new animal in place, the master tells everyone to watch very carefully. Without the pig noticing, the old man positions the chisel on its head, to everyone's surprise. The apprentices are shocked and say it's impossible because before, the animal went crazy just seeing it. The master then reveals that the pig didn't react because it didn't feel any killer intent from him. He continues and explains that animals are very sensitive to that kind of intention. The old man demonstrates by releasing a bit of his intent, causing the pig to freak out immediately. The animal drools with fear upon sensing the energy and backs away, startled by the sudden change in atmosphere. Chiyo-yu notices the intent and is surprised because the man revealed it and concealed it in an instant. The big guy asks if he's a martial arts expert, but his boss dismisses the possibility. And so, the old man prepares for the dispatch and says they are only ready when they can avoid exposing their intent. Everyone watches in shock as the master finally delivers the final blow with the mallet. He continues, saying that more important than anything is to finish it in a single blow, so fast they don't even know. Chiyo-yu is impressed because the animal was gone without even a squeal, and Samajian says it was a powerful strike. With the job done, the old man stands up and says the real work begins after the dispatch. The man tells the apprentices to hurry up and drain the blood from the dispatched animal. Chiyo-yu comments that the old man's voice is no joke, and that he's very strict about his work. The dumpling vendor explains that he has no children, and is looking for someone to continue his legacy. The big guy doesn't understand the reason for all the drama, since it's just a job of dispatching animals. Our protagonist says that if he dedicated his life to it, it's normal to be so demanding about the task. Yu doesn't get comparison but remembers that his former master also had an incredible voice. Samajian comments that his voice wasn't the only big thing about him, as his body was also huge. He jokes that the master probably liked him because his size was similar to his own. Suddenly, our protagonist says with a determined look that they are going to take over the butcher's shop. Yu is shocked by the decision, and the swordsman explains that there's no other work for them. He reveals he wants a job he can be proud to tell his siblings about and leave his past behind. With that in mind, our hero approaches the master butcher to talk about the position. Samajian applies for the job, and the old man asks if both of them are interested in the work. The master scoffs and says that after seeing him in action, they must think the job is easy. And so he apologizes to the customers but asks all of them to go home. Our protagonist says no way, and that after seeing his strike, it would be impossible to think that. He praises the old man's skill and comments that it was an art form, carrying the weight of years of experience. At the compliment, the master butcher asks them to wait a moment and takes them somewhere else. And so, the man walks down a wooden ramp while another pig follows him closely. A moment later, our protagonist is positioned in front of the animal, ready for what's next. The old man then challenges him, asking him to show his skills since he wants to take over the business. Our protagonist reveals he's never done this before but says he's willing to try and learn the craft. From there, he kneels and prepares for the dispatch, while the pig eats peacefully from its bowl. With a single, precise blow, the animal's life force splatters across the wooden ceiling of the place. The master butcher stumbles and falls backward, completely shocked by the scene he just witnessed. With wide eyes, the old man comments that what took him a lifetime to learn, the young man did with ease. Still in disbelief, he asks once more if the young man really has never learned this before. Our protagonist calmly replies that he just followed what the old man did moments ago. The master then yells at the young man, telling him to hurry up and hang the animal for the next step. Yu gets annoyed by the yelling and grumbles a bit but gets ready to help his boss with the task. The master butcher's jaw drops because the young man easily did what took him a lifetime to learn. He comments in shock that Yu single-handedly lifted a pig that would normally require about 4 strong men. And so, the big guy prepares to hang the animal and asks if he really needs tools. The old man is confused by the question and wants to know what on earth the big guy means by that. Yu then drops the chains and walks toward a wooden wall, leaving the others behind. Suddenly, a very loud sound of something breaking echoes throughout the butcher shop. Our protagonist turns to his friend and asks in confusion what he's up to now. The master runs desperately toward the sound while the swordsman follows right behind him. Yu simply punched through the wall and asks if, in the end, it's not all just about cutting meat. The old man is speechless at the young man's absurd strength and finally understands the situation. He asks if they are martial artists, and Samajian confirms they were, once upon a time. The old man doesn't understand why martial artists would want to do this kind of hard labor. Our protagonist then reveals with a serious look that they just want to live an ordinary life. The master says that with their skills, they could find other work, but the young man says it wasn't easy. Hearing this, the old man realizes that these young men's lives have been anything but peaceful so far. The old man sighs and decides to accept the 2 young men as his apprentices at the butcher shop. He comments that it's a shame he doesn't have much time left, and our protagonist asks him to teach them well. With a confident smile, the swordsman assures him that the master won't be disappointed with his choice. Some time passes, and the scene changes to a cat relaxing peacefully on the roof of a house. Elsewhere, a calligraphy brush moves quickly, writing an important message. A man named Uncle Jang is shocked to hear the name of the House of Living Immortal Healers. His servant reveals that the imperial court requested their help because a nobleman in Hangzhou became very ill. Uncle Jang gets angry upon learning that the doctors from the House of Healers got into a fight with some bandits. Another man named Dangbak explains that the bandits were after the light blue stone milk. Hearing about the rare item, Uncle Jang becomes even more furious at the unexpected news. He complains that such a precious item was wasted to treat a dying member of royalty. However, Dang corrects him and says the item wasn't used and there's still a chance to get it. A drink is served while Uncle Jang tries to understand how the rare item is still available. Dang Bake explains that the bandits and the doctors clashed over the person who had the item. With that in mind, Uncle Jang excitedly asks who owns the light blue stone milk. Dang Bake reveals the owner is a man named Samajian, who bought the item to treat his sister. Uncle Jang gives a mocking smile and comments he didn't know the association had the rare item. He then sips his drink and thinks that with the item, he can cure the most precious child in his family. With that, he orders them to get the item, and if it's already been used, to capture the sister to extract its effects. Meanwhile, at the butcher shop, our protagonist is cutting meat with incredible and precise skill. With deep concentration, the young man continues his work under the watchful eye of the master butcher. The old man then lets out a laugh and says the young man's skill is simply incredible to watch. He praises the young man's learning speed and says there's nothing more he can teach him. With a humble smile, our protagonist thanks him and says it's all because of the master's teachings. The old man says he's the one who's grateful because he had hoped the butcher shop would maintain its reputation. He reveals that if that didn't happen, it would be better for the place to disappear forever. The old man's hand trembles slightly, showing all the emotion he feels at that moment. And so, he thanks the young man for preserving his wish and says he can now depart in peace. Our protagonist replies that he's the one who should be thankful, because now he can finally settle down. Suddenly, Chio-yu appears, complaining that they could just cut it any old way and sell it. Chio-yu throws the meat into a barrel and asks his boss if he really needs to learn all that. The master then says not to give the big guy a knife, and just leave him with the manual labor. Our protagonist comments that his skill in dispatching the animals is useful, and that's good enough. With a smug smile, the big guy says the old man finally said something that makes sense. From there, the three take a break, and our protagonist pours them a drink to relax a bit. Chio-yu agrees to do what the master says and admits he really has no knack for the knife. With a calm look, the swordsman takes a sip of his drink and tells his friend to do whatever he wants. The big guy thanks his boss and then turns to offer the master a drink as well. However, our protagonist slaps his arm and yells that it's completely out of line. The big guy doesn't understand why and says it's just a drink, since the old man is departing. The master then perks up and says that even if he passed on right now, he couldn't refuse a drink on a day like this. Faced with the old man's enthusiasm, our protagonist is left with a shocked and speechless look. Sometime later, he stares at the new butcher shop and thinks that they've really started something new here. Suddenly, his sister appears, sweeping the place, and excitedly asks when he got here. Our protagonist takes the broom from her and says her body is weak, and she shouldn't be doing that. The young woman says she heard on her way over and comments that her older brother took over the butcher shop. She explains she cleaned everything up because he worked hard, and the young man says that's enough for her to stop. Hyen then leaves a package on the table and asks if business at the new butcher shop is going well. Our protagonist serves some tea and reveals the old owner passed on a few days ago, so business has been slow. The young woman says the old man passed peacefully in his sleep on the night her brother took over the place. With a tray in his hands, the swordsman asks when he arrived, because he was worried about the delay. The escort warrior says he just got here and as his brother can see, he's perfectly fine. He's surprised by how quickly things have moved, and our hero asks if by any chance he didn't like the idea. Hyen explains that's not it, but he never imagined his older brother would take over a butcher shop. Because of this, he asks if the young man will be alright, since it's a very famous establishment in the region. The young man remembers that the old owner was no joke, and if his skill is weak, he'll be criticized. Samajian reassures him, saying he's confident and that they all need to work hard to live well. Suddenly, Guang-ho appears in the distance, desperately yelling his siblings' names. Our protagonist stops what he's doing and asks what on earth is going on outside. The youngest then runs in and yells desperately that they've finally arrived. Out of patience, Chio-yu yanks his ear and tells the kid to stop talking nonsense and explain the situation. Guang-ho yells for him to let go and complains about the treatment while the big guy holds him firmly. The big guy jokes that it's a sign of affection and asks if he wants to see some real violence. With a hand on his cheek, the boy refuses the offer and says his brother's friend has already done that before. And so, the youngest reveals that a messenger from the clinic arrived, and Samajian is surprised. The young man says the doctor who went to Hangzhou has arrived and said to bring his sister as soon as possible. Without wasting a moment, our protagonist takes off his apron and says they should go right now. Sometime later, they arrive at the clinic with a large wooden sign in front of the place. Once inside, a man greets them and says they were waiting for the family to arrive. With a polite smile, our protagonist says they came running as soon as they got the news. The man says it's no problem, as the doctor from the main family wanted to see the patient as soon as possible. From there, he introduces a woman named Wang Yang, who is there to help with the treatment. Upon seeing the woman's face, our protagonist is completely shocked and speechless. With a smirk, she greets him and comments on what a coincidence their meeting is. Beside her are the two guards who helped them fight the bandits in the dark forest. Seeing the surprise, Wang Jiang asks if by any chance the two of them already know each other. Our protagonist explains they were attacked while getting the medicine, and she helped them in the forest. With a laugh, the doctor comments it's a very curious connection between them. The swordsman then thanks Wang Yang once again for the great help she gave him that day. The doctor says it was nothing and understands his hurry, since his sister was sick. And so, Samajian introduces Jin and says that this woman will be examining her now. The young woman introduces herself, and Wang Yang compliments her, saying she is as beautiful as a celestial maiden. The doctor holds the girl's hands and says they need to fight together to overcome the illness. Jin nods in agreement and Wang Yang smiles, pleased with the young woman's positive response. Because of this, she asks everyone to leave the room and leave the two of them alone. The scene then shifts to the roof of the clinic, showing that time is passing. About an hour later, the young men are still waiting outside, anxious for the result. Chiyo-yu complains about the wait, and our protagonist remains silent, just watching the door. Suddenly, the room's door finally opens and the doctor steps out. Without wasting a second, Samajian runs up and anxiously asks how his sister's examination went. With a serious look, Wang Yang reveals she has finally identified the girl's illness. The doctor explains that Jin was born with celestial yin divine meridians, and he's confused by the name. She says the conditions are similar and mentions that a patient with the same problem appeared before. The doctor reveals that if it weren't for her family's records, they would have never discovered the truth. Samajian asks if there's a cure, but Wang Yang says she can't give a definitive answer. The young woman explains the other patient missed the right timing, but her family's acupuncture works. With that, our protagonist wants to know what happened to the patient from the records and if he was saved. The doctor falls silent and looks away, seeming not to have good news to share. Night falls over the clinic, and a dense fog covers the entire courtyard. Alone in a room, Samajian tells himself that the treatment has to work, no matter what. His brothers and Chiyo-yu wait outside, complaining that the procedure hasn't even started yet. Our protagonist and his friend wait in silence with very worried expressions on their faces. The swordsman's eyes show all the tension and fear he's feeling at that moment. Suddenly, Wang Yang appears at the door with a serious face, and he wonders what that means. Seeing her expression, our protagonist lowers his head and thinks the treatment has failed. Wang Yang confirms the treatment failed, and our protagonist desperately asks why. The doctor explains that the other patient was already in very bad shape, and the yin energy of this illness is stronger. With a serious look, she concludes that this is a much more severe condition than they imagined. Wang Jiang is shocked and says that no one with the other illness lived past 18. The doctor reveals that the other patient lived until 21 because of the blue stone milk. Hearing this revelation, our protagonist thinks that even with the medicine, the other girl didn't survive. However, Wang Yang guarantees that if acupuncture had been used with the medicine, the result would have been different. With that, our protagonist asks her to take good care of his sister, because she is very precious to him. The doctor stares at him in silence, seeming to reflect on the weight of that desperate plea. Later, Samajian meditates alone, but anxiety begins to take over his thoughts. With his eyes full of worry, he wonders what he'll do if something bad happens to her. Outside, Chiyo-yu complains that an hour has already passed and tells the younger brother to be quiet. Suddenly, the boy gets startled and seems to have sensed something approaching them. The big guy asks if it's the boss, and our protagonist confirms he sensed someone's presence. With a sharp gaze, the swordsman says it seems like some unwanted guests have arrived. And so, the pair turns and faces the bamboo forest from where the mysterious presence came. Amidst the dense fog, a bamboo forest creates a very tense and dangerous setting for them. A moment later, a large group of armed men emerges, running through the trees. One of the men asks where they are, and another says they're in the central wing and need to hurry. The group's leader reveals that the main objective is to get the blue stone milk back for them. With that, he calls for the leader of Squad 3, who responds to his call immediately. The chief orders them to lock the main gate and not let anyone escape the premises. From there, all the men run at high speed to carry out their master's orders. Suddenly, Chiyo-yu appears in front of them and calls them rats with a mocking smile. Upon seeing the big guy, all the henchmen stop running and are shocked by his appearance. Without a second thought, the big guy attacks one of the men and breaks his sword with a single blow. The group's leader is shocked by the young man's strength and stares at him with a surprised look. Faced with the situation, the big guy asks who the hell they are and what they're doing here. With a smirk, the big guy scoffs and calls them clowns for their matching outfits. The chief realizes he's an expert but notices the young man doesn't look like the so-called Samajian. The leader then decides he'll go after Samajian and leaves the big guy to his men. With that, the man moves with incredible speed, leaving a trail of energy behind him. Chiyo-yu turns in surprise upon sensing the enemy's sudden movement as he moves away. Faced with the situation, he comments that the guy is way too fast and he could barely keep up. One of the henchmen then asks if he's not going to try and stop his boss by any chance. The big guy is confused by the question and doesn't understand the man's concern for his friend. The henchman says his boss is in danger, but Chio-yu starts laughing in their faces. With a confident smile, he proposes a bet and asks which boss is going to go down first. At the taunt, the man gets annoyed and says the big guy's arrogance is too much. He then gets ready for the fight while Chio-yu tells them all to come at him at once. From there, the fight finally begins with a swift and coordinated attack from the enemies. All the henchmen charge at once, surrounding the big guy from every possible side. With a mocking smile, Chio-yu faces the men who leap to attack at the same instant. And so, a massive explosion of energy occurs, sending all the enemies flying. Meanwhile, the leader feels the power of the attack, and is shocked by the big guy's strength. The leader feels the energy from the explosion and realizes his man is in trouble with the big guy. Because of this, he decides to finish Sammo-jeon quickly, get the item, and go back to help his companion. Suddenly, our protagonist appears in front of him and asks what he's thinking so hard about right now. The enemy is startled, because he didn't sense his presence and prepares to draw his sword and start the fight. Sammo-jeon then questions him about who he is and what the heck he came to do in this place. The man understands that this is the so-called Sammo-jeon and thinks that they are actually real monsters. Our protagonist realizes the other man isn't going to answer and moves in to start the confrontation. And so, the leader attacks with a swift and powerful blow in the direction of the swordsman before him. However, our hero easily dodges the attack by leaning back at the last second. The enemy is furious at the young man's ease, and his eyes glow with pure hatred and rage. From there, a rapid exchange of blows happens between the two warriors in the middle of the forest. Without warning, our protagonist stops the enemy's blade using only his hands, and the man is shocked. He holds the sword with great firmness, showing off all his impressive strength and resistance. With just a little bit of force, the opponent's weapon shatters into two pieces, falling to the forest floor. Seeing this, the gang leader screams in pure rage and frustration at the humiliating defeat. With the enemy down, our protagonist approaches, holding the hilt of the broken sword. And so, he asks once more where he's from and what he came to do at the clinic. The man is shocked to hear our hero mention the light blue stone milk. The swordsman concludes they came for the item and asks how they found out about it. Faced with defeat, the enemy gives a mocking smile and seems to accept his final fate. Our protagonist then offers a deal, saying he'll let him live if he answers. However, the man simply falls backward, lifeless, leaving the young man completely surprised. Lying on the grass, the enemy foams at the mouth, showing that he took his own life. Our protagonist understands the man bit down on the poison he had in his mouth to avoid talking. With this, he thinks he should have told Chio-yu to keep some of them alive, and suddenly he senses something. A moment later, his friend appears and asks if by any chance he's already finished the job. Sammo-jeon asks if he finished off all of them, and Chio-yu confirms with a proud smile. At that answer, the young man is left speechless with an expression of pure disappointment on his face. He thinks he shouldn't have sent his friend, and in the background, we see the result of the total wipeout. Chio-yu then asks if the guy is gone, and our hero confirms he passed on before saying anything. With a smirk, Chio-yu says it was hard not to notice, since all his attention was right there. The big guy regrets not knowing who's behind this, and our protagonist says it won't happen again. Faced with the situation, the young man points to the body on the ground and warns what will happen if they come back. And so, he makes it clear that anyone who shows up will meet the same fate as that fallen man. Chio-yu then grabs his friend's face and jokes that a little bit of chaos adds some spice to life. Our protagonist gets serious and asks if, after all that, the big guy still wants more trouble. At the question, the big guy gets flustered and says that's not really it. The swordsman reveals that what he hates is having his peace disturbed, and his friend agrees with him. From there, our hero tells his partner to clean up the mess by himself, and the big guy is shocked. The young man says he was the one who got carried away and that he's going on ahead, leaving the big guy with the dirty work. Alone in the bamboo forest, the big guy grumbles and wonders how he's going to finish all of this. Sometime later, he finally arrives at the entrance of the place and celebrates finishing the cleanup. Now inside the room, our protagonist hears the door open and sees his friend finally returning. Suddenly, the swordsman smells something burning, and the big guy gives an awkward laugh about the dirty bamboo. Our hero then changes the subject and asks if the treatment is still not over and assures him everything will be fine. Chio-yu says that with the help of the healers and the medicine, there's no way it can go wrong, but our hero cuts him off. Suddenly the door opens, and Wang Yong comes out of the room, coughing and looking very tired. Without wasting a second, our protagonist runs over and anxiously asks how his sister's treatment went. The doctor then reveals that the acupuncture was a success, and her condition has improved a lot. Upon hearing the good news, the two companions are completely shocked and speechless. Overjoyed, our protagonist takes her hands and thanks her profusely for the help she provided. With a smile, the doctor tells them to come in, as she will explain everything in more detail. Now in the room, young Jin is coughing a lot and seems very weak after the procedure. Our protagonist then looks at her with a serious and worried expression about the situation. The doctor explains that the bad smell is the impurities being expelled from the girl's body. One of the guards asks her to regulate her breathing, but the young woman insists she's not that weak. Wang Yang reveals that even with everything, they couldn't completely cure her illness. Hearing this news, our protagonist is confused and remembers she said her condition had improved. The doctor confirms the improvement and says the young woman is much healthier than before the treatment. However, she apologizes and says that unfortunately, it wasn't possible to cure the illness once and for all. Our protagonist says she doesn't need to apologize and that all he can do is be thankful. The doctor reveals that it was actually a stroke of luck, as she was able to see a rare condition. From there, she reinforces that treating patients is a duty and a moral obligation for a doctor. Faced with the situation, Chiou-yu gets a furious look, not at all satisfied with the treatment's outcome. He then comments he had a bad feeling ever since she said the others had failed before. Because of this, the doctor's two guards get a serious and annoyed expression at the comment. Chiou-yu gets ticked off and tells his boss that's enough, because in the end, it's all just pretty words. With a mocking smile, he repeats the phrase, stroke of luck, and says it must be nice for her. The guards get enraged and yell, asking if he's insulting the young lady in the main house. With his eyes glowing, the big guy asks if by any chance he said something wrong to them. And so, he moves forward and shoves them back, leaving the female doctor and the other doctor completely shocked. A powerful aura surrounds the big guy, but our protagonist calls out to him to stop the commotion. With his eyes glowing red, the swordsman orders his friend to apologize right that instant. Huang Yang is shocked by the aura and thinks the young man is even stronger than the big guy. Without hesitation, Chiou-yu bows and apologizes, leaving everyone shocked by his obedience. Our protagonist then asks for forgiveness for his friend's outburst and says he will apologize too. Huang Yang says there's no need and that actually, she should be the one apologizing for the situation. The doctor reveals that there won't be any major problems, but they can't rule out a relapse. Wang Jiang defends the doctor, saying the acupuncture was perfect and couldn't have been done better. The doctor reveals that the condition is more vicious than the other illness, and that there was a mistake in the process. Our protagonist is confused and repeats the word, mistake, trying to understand what actually happened. Wang Jiang reveals that he overestimated the power of the blue stone milk, and our hero is shocked. The man explains that the medicine alone wasn't enough to suppress the illness's energy. Chiou-yu gets annoyed and wonders what kind of medicine would be enough if even the rare item didn't work. Huang Yang says it's not about being enough, but rather about having a different use than what they needed. She explains that there are superior remedies when it comes to extreme and unbalanced energies. Our protagonist understands that his sister's illness required a more specific medicine, and she confirms it. With a determined look, he asks what kind of medicine they need to save her life. The doctor then reveals that the item they need is the Great Rejuvenation Pill of Shaolin. The scene changes to the butcher shop, showing a man walking peacefully on a sunny day. Back at the butcher shop, Chiou-yu is eating and asks if they're going to rob someone, leaving our hero confused. The big guy takes a drink and says he's obviously talking about the Shaolin Temple, and our protagonist remains silent. The big guy questions if he's not going, and Sima Jian says he'll think about it since his sister has improved. Chiou-yu understands that he'll go at some point, but our protagonist firmly denies it. His friend is surprised, and the swordsman explains the doctor assured him the young woman will be fine for now. With a serene look, he says he just got back and wants to spend more time with his siblings. He explains that the journey is long, and they need to stabilize the butcher shop, and Chiou-yu remembers there will be no one to take care of it. And so, the big guy concludes that if the shop is to continue, they need to train someone. At the suggestion, our protagonist is confused and asks who they could possibly train. The big guy suggests the two brothers and reminds him the boss wanted them to quit their jobs. Because of this, the trip to Shaolin will have to wait until the two of them learn to run the business. His friend says Hyan is easygoing but worries about Ho, and suddenly someone appears at the door. A moment later, a boy runs in and desperately yells for the young men's older brother. Our protagonist tells him to calm down and asks what on earth is happening. With a panicked face, the young man reveals that their second brother has been kidnapped. Our protagonist is completely shocked and speechless at the news he just heard. He then asks what the boy means by kidnapped, and his friend watches the scene seriously. The young man explains that his brother was kidnapped by bandits during an escort trip for the agency. Enraged, Chio-yu wonders what kind of bandits would dare to do something like that to him. And so, our protagonist decides they need to go to the agency where Hyen worked first. Some time later, they finally arrive in front of the large gate of the Juhei escort agency. The boy points and confirms that this is the place, and the group prepares to go inside and investigate the situation. From there, they enter the courtyard of the place, which is packed with people everywhere. Amidst the crowd, someone asks what kind of negotiations they're talking about. A man from the agency says he can't give details, but that the hostages' lives are their priority. The crowd gets restless, and a man asks everyone to calm down, saying they are negotiating. He then asks for a little trust and guarantees that everyone will return home safely. The young man comments that this is the usual formal answer, and that they should go ask directly. Suddenly someone asks if they plan to send a rescue team, and the man is surprised. Another man asks who the boy is, and he introduces himself as Sama-ho, the brother of the hostage Hyen. The man laments their brother's situation and says the agency intends to resolve everything through negotiation. He then turns to the crowd and asks everyone to trust and wait, as they will do their best. A moment later, the agency representative goes inside the building, leaving everyone behind without further explanation. Guang-ho comments that the guy doesn't seem sincere and suggests they talk to one of his brother's colleagues. And so, he approaches one of the escort warriors and calls him by the name of Jang Song. Without beating around the bush, the young man asks what's really happening and if they are truly negotiating. The young man stammers a bit, but confirms they are negotiating and that everyone will be back safely soon. Guang-ho doesn't buy the story and pulls him by the arm to talk somewhere more private. Seeing the scene, our protagonist tells Chio-yu it's better if they follow the two to hear the conversation. In an alley, the young man demands the truth and tells his brother's colleague to stop beating around the bush. Jang Song finally reveals that the bandits want money, but the amount they're asking for is insane. Hearing this revelation, Guang-ho asks how much they want, and the young man reveals it's 100 taels of gold. The younger brother is completely shocked and speechless upon hearing the absurd ransom amount. Jang Song turns in surprise and confirms the amount of 100 taels, showing it's not a mistake. Suddenly, our protagonist appears and says they were about to go in, but the youngest fainted suddenly. Jang Song gets worried and asks what happened to Jin, and Chio-yu says she must have been really shocked by the news. Our protagonist confirms with a serious look, and the young man asks if the young woman is feeling better now. With a sigh, Jang Song says that at least that's a relief and feels much calmer about the situation. Chio-yu then questions how an agency as small as this one is going to get 100 taels of gold for the ransom. Jang Song gets annoyed and says the Juhei agency is actually pretty big and famous throughout their region. And so, the big guy faces him and asks if they're planning something else, like sending a rescue squad. The young man is completely shocked and asks how he knew, as they were trying to keep it all a secret. The big guy explains that the atmosphere of the place makes it pretty obvious, but questions if the agency can handle it alone. Jang Song reveals they should be getting help from nearby forces, and that they've already sent people to various places. Chio-yu doubts that will work and says the bandits have surely already predicted what their response would be. Our protagonist asks what kind of bandits would do this, as there's usually a line between them and the agencies. Jang Seong gets annoyed and says they still haven't learned their lesson, even after their fortress was destroyed. Hearing that, our protagonist gets a surprised look and repeats the young man's words to confirm. The young man reveals that the famous Golden Tiger Fortress was completely destroyed not too long ago. He finishes by saying that everyone was super excited when the news finally spread throughout the region. Our protagonist then asks if the Golden Tiger Fortress is back and what that means for them. Jang Seong explains that the chief who had left the fortress has finally returned to his old post. Hearing that, our protagonist gets a serious and thoughtful look about the new situation, and so he calls his younger brother by name, and the young man looks at him, a little confused. The swordsman says he asked the neighbor to look after Jin and tells the boy to go take proper care of her. Wang Ho asks where he's going all of a sudden, and his older brother says he has a place to go. Chio-yu calms him down and says they have many connections and will find a way to save Hyen. The scene then shifts to the office of the Juhei Escort Agency chief in another location. The agency chief is shocked by the news and asks his man if it's really true. The man confirms and reveals that a message from the Fire Flower Agency arrived and confirmed everything. With an excited smile, the chief celebrates, saying this is good and that the heavens must be helping them. The young man confirms that the warriors from the Nangang clan are on their way to help and have already left for the fortress. The chief is surprised by the speed but remembers that the other agency was attacked by them before. With that, he says they also need to hurry, because they have people to save, and the man agrees. The scene then shifts to the destroyed fortress where some bandits are on guard duty. Inside, a man is drinking and eating peacefully in a completely destroyed room. The bandit chief then asks if there has been any reaction from the agency, and how many times they've sent a hostage. One of his men approaches and reveals this is already the 4th time they've done this. With a furious look, the leader complains that even after 4 hostages, there's been no real response. The henchman then reveals that they actually made a suggestion for the current situation. He explains the agency can't prepare the ransom all at once and asks if they'll accept half first. The chief takes a sip of his drink and seems to find the proposal quite interesting. The man continues and says if they send half the prisoners, they'll prepare the rest of the money. Angrily, the leader complains that the great Nok-juk has fallen so low and wonders who destroyed the place. The henchman reveals they've mobilized everyone but still haven't found any clues. Enraged, the chief crushes the liquor bottle in his hand with all his strength. His eyes glow, and he says he'd love to find the culprits, but rebuilding the fortress comes first. He says that to do so, they bowed down and got support from 18 fortresses, and they need money. And so, he orders them to move up the timeline and send the hostages' eyes along with their ears. Suddenly a man appears and suggests that instead, they send a head next time. With a furious look, the fortress chief glares at the newcomer who just showed up. The man calls him Chief Inspector and warns that if he pushes too hard, the reaction will be very serious. With a malicious smile, the inspector says that's exactly what he wants to happen. He continues saying it's no problem if the punitive force is strong, because the 18 elders are with them. His companions agree, saying that unless the army's elite shows up, nothing unexpected will happen. Faced with the man's confidence, the fortress chief remains silent and seems to agree with the plan. And so, he orders his henchmen to cut off a head and send it to the agency immediately. Suddenly, a huge explosion occurs, destroying part of the wooden wall of the place. The bandit chief turns, completely shocked and speechless at the sudden attack. A moment later, our protagonist appears through the smoke, kicking everything in his path. Chio-yu lands right behind him and comments that they really wrecked the place and they've already rebuilt quite a bit. Furious, the chief asks who they are and if by any chance they're from the Juhai Agency's rescue team. The inspector also asks what they are if they're not from the rescue team he mentioned. Our protagonist says they're just 2 guys from a little shop and asks if he's the master of the fortress. With a mocking smile, the inspector faces him and asks what happens if he is the master of the place. With a cold look, our protagonist declares that if he is the master of the fortress, then he will have to go down.